I know how easy it is to get completely overwhelmed with information when you try to make decisions on photography gear. It seems that what you can afford always lacks some kind of feature you might need, and it feels like your images depend on it, so it's not a decision you can take lightly. Now, the main resource that you think would help you make those decisions is gear reviews here on YouTube, but nitpicking corner frame sharpness at 400% in a side-by-side comparison is what usually makes you more confused, not less. And the problem here is the model of the review video in its core. To get the basic portrait kit right, you have to figure out your specific combination of 43 distinct features like sensor size, focal length, flash unit recycle time, and modifier size. Now, every review revolves around comparing those features to previous generation models or competitor brands. But the assumption all of this is based on is wrong. To make a good buying decision, you're not supposed to compare products to products. You should compare product features to the outcomes you need those products to help you achieve. So in this video, I'll help you understand how those 43 features translate to real-world outcomes, and I'll show you how to make a decision on all of them with just 5 practical questions. Now, I know that solving such a complex set of problems that easily can sound sketchy at first, but the key to all of it is understanding that every feature has a single purpose: to compensate for some lack of control. Now, hear me out. If you've watched any of the Apple events since 2023, you've probably noticed the shot on iPhone edited on Mac disclaimer at the end. The question is, how many times have you stopped watching and thought to yourself, wow, the quality is terrible, they probably shot this on a phone? Chances are, not once. So what does it mean? That a control environment, good light, and your experience can compensate for almost everything the camera lacks. Or to flip it around, what a high-end mirrorless camera does better than the iPhone is help you compensate for the lack of control on the environment, lack of light, or lack of experience. And if we look at the spectrum where on one end you have no control and on the other end you have full control, portrait photography covers the last 10% to the right. And if you're wondering what's on the far left of the spectrum, just follow the most expensive gear: sports and wildlife. You don't control the distance, so you have to get the most versatile and longest telephoto zoom lens. You don't control the light, so the low light performance and dynamic range of the sensor must be top-notch. You also don't control the action, so in order to capture it, you have to be able to shoot at very high burst rates. The action you're capturing is not repeatable, so you must have dual card slots for backup. So now that we understand this, we can look deeper and see that all the control you might want comes down to 4 key areas. Do you control the light? Do you control the environment? Do you control the subject? And do you control the delivery? Now, the last puzzle piece is your style, because some of the features work identically under different conditions, and your personal preference is the only differentiator. So naturally, if you want to figure out those 43 features, question 1 should be, do you control the light? And you might be thinking here about the distinction between shooting natural light and flash. But if you shoot portraits, you must control the light, no matter the light source. So what features depend on how well you control the light? Let's start with 3 that are really just one conversation: sensor size, low light performance, and dynamic range. Sensor size has all the different nuances, like how it impacts the depth of field or how you pick your lenses based on the crop factor of the sensor. But the main reason people obsess over it is because bigger sensors used to mean cleaner high ISO images and higher dynamic range. That's still somewhat true, but the technology is so good these days that the dynamic range difference is within one stop in most cases. And you won't be shooting portraits at ISO 6400, so all 3 go out the window together. You can get a full frame if your budget allows it and be calm about future lens compatibility, but even the cheaper ones like the Canon R8 will do the job. And even if you get an APS-C body, no one will see the difference in images. Trust me on this one. Now, in-body image stabilization and optical stabilization in the lens only make a difference if you shoot at longer exposures handheld, which in portrait work, you don't. You either set your shutter speed at a minimum of double the focal length, or you use flash, which freezes the motion even at longer exposures. As far as flash features go, the only one that matters here is HSS. Now, every flash unit has a predetermined spec called the sync speed, which means you have to set your camera shutter below a certain threshold for the flash to synchronize properly. For most flashes, it's 1/160th or 1/200th of a second. It makes almost no difference if you shoot in the studio, but if you shoot in broad daylight, that 1/200th of a second is usually way too bright. So you have three options. Either close down the aperture to an f8 or f11, get an ND filter to darken the frame down and keep the aperture open, or get a flash unit that supports HSS or high-speed sync, which means you can set your shutter speed beyond the regular sync speed. And you have to make sure both the flash unit and the wireless trigger support it, and the trigger is compatible with your camera. Now, if you shoot only natural light, the flash and modifier section becomes irrelevant. But since you still want to have at least some kind of control over the light, getting a 5-in-1 reflector to diffuse, bounce, or block the light is always a good idea. Moving on. Question 2 is, do you control the environment? Now, environment control comes down to three things: weather, power, and portability. Everything else is only important for the very edge cases. Camera and lens weight, important if you're hiking to shoot your portraits on a mountaintop every other day. Trivial if you shoot in a studio or you drive to your photo shoots by car. EVF resolution and screen type, I honestly can't remember when was the last time I used an EVF. I really like using the screen as a waist-level viewfinder, but almost every camera at any price point now has some flavor of a tilting screen. Either way, EVF resolution and screen type don't affect image quality. They're ergonomic, comfort features that are purely a personal preference. Do I like Canon's flippy screens? Yes. Can I shoot portraits without it? Also yes. Now, as far as light goes, TTL is cool for events, but for portraits, I always set my flash power manually. I just don't like when my camera's metering system tells me how my light is supposed to look. Modeling light is useful in dark environments. It helps your camera focus more accurately and your model doesn't get their pupils dilated in the dark. But I honestly can't think of a flash unit that doesn't have one, so you can just work with whatever you have. Now, you might think weather sealing is non-negotiable if you shoot on location, but realistically, if you plan on using off-camera flash, you probably won't be shooting in the rain or during a sandstorm. If you shoot natural light on location, a little bit of weather is a realistic concern, but even then, most cameras handle light, moisture, and dust fine without a weather-sealed body. And if by any chance you get booked to shoot some crazy headshots of storm chasers in the middle of a hurricane one time, just rent the damn gear that fits the job and double check if it's insured. Weather sealing, not important for 95% of you. So what does matter is power and portability. If you shoot outdoors, your main constraint will be power. So camera's battery life and flash power source are the ones to look at. For most cameras, just get one extra battery and after a couple of test shoots, you'll figure out if that's enough. General rule of thumb is if you go through a whole battery in one photo shoot, you probably take way too many shots. Now, flash power source is a decision to make. If 80% of what you shoot is indoors, just save some money, get the wired version, and rent the battery-powered units for those remaining 20%. Otherwise, you might want to get the battery-powered version from the get-go. Flash power is another thing to consider. For the vast majority of portrait work, 500 to 600 watt-seconds is the sweet spot. At this power range, you can start using larger modifiers that eat up more light and fight back the bright ambient if you shoot on location. You can potentially get away with using less powerful strobes in a studio where you control the ambient and shoot at wider aperture settings, or you might need more than 600 watt-seconds if you shoot with big soft boxes in direct sunlight. Now, one thing to remember is that you don't have to use the full power of the flash every time. If you compare a 600 watt-second unit at half power to a 300 watt-second unit at full power, you will get some noticeable benefits in flash recycle time and color and power consistency across shots with the more powerful one. Card slots is another one that comes down to environment. If you shoot indoors and tether to a laptop, Single card slot is enough because your laptop is the second copy. If you shoot without an assistant on location and tethering isn't practical, get a body with dual card slots. Data safety is non-negotiable on any paid photo shoot. Losing a card with no backup is a big reputation problem, if not the legal one. So this feature comes down to can you tether or not. Now, modifier size, first and foremost, depends on what you shoot and what's your style, and we'll get to that later. But handling a large softbox on a windy day without an assistant is something you might want to avoid. Also, how the modifier folds up affects your setup time. So if you shoot on location or outdoors, opt for an umbrella or a softbox with a quick fold speed ring. Now we're only 2 questions down and already have 19 of the 43 questions covered. Question 3 is, do you control the subject? And most of the highly debated features land in this segment. The camera's autofocus system and the lens autofocus motor type is important if you shoot unpredictable and fast-moving subjects. In portrait photography, that usually only happens when you have kids and pets in a family portrait session. And if in the DSLR days that was quite a challenge, now even the cheaper mirrorless cameras have eye autofocus and the lenses usually keep up with it. The differentiator here is generally not the model tier or price tag, but the brand itself. Some manufacturers like Canon or Sony have better AF systems than, say, Panasonic or Fuji, but even that gap is noticeably shrinking in recent years. So if you're shooting still posed subjects, any modern camera and lens combo will do. But if you lean toward capturing raw emotions and movements in a family photo shoot, better stick with Canon or Sony for now. Exactly the same logic applies to burst rate. For fast-moving action, you'll want to capture more frames. But if the subject is controlled, the burst rate stops being a deciding factor. Now, if you're shooting in fast bursts, flash recycle time is the thing that will be the bottleneck. What helps most is shooting at the lower power settings because each flash does not drain the strobe's condensers fully, and it's much quicker to recycle. Other than that, you can try and get a flash unit that has an action mode, which is dedicated for fast bursts, but these will be significantly more expensive and usually not worth the investment for portrait photographers specifically. Flash duration is another one that only matters for fast-moving objects because in these scenarios, flash acts as a shutter to freeze the action. Some flash units have a freeze mode that locks the flash duration at very high speeds like 1/10,000th of a second, but for portraits, the regular mode is usually enough to get sharp images. Now, as far as lenses go, the debate of a zoom lens versus a fixed one also goes into this category and is a matter of whether you capture or create. Fast-moving subjects and unpredictable spaces might push you toward the zoom lens. It gives you more adaptability at your fingertips and helps you react to what's happening. If you create images instead of capture and you control the environment and the subject, I'd go for a fixed lens. It's usually cheaper, sharper, and has higher optical quality and wider available apertures than a zoom lens. And the last one is again a modifier size. If you regularly shoot groups of people, I would recommend getting a bigger softbox, at least 50 inches in diameter for a group of 4. Lower than that can start giving you more uneven and harsher lighting if you're using one flash. The main decision on modifier size still comes down to stylistic preferences, but as far as physics go, for larger groups you'll have to pull the light further back from the subjects, and to keep the relative softness of the light, your light modifier has to be proportionally bigger. And the next question ends the #1 debate about camera bodies once and for all. Question 4 is, do you control the delivery? The first number on any camera body you see is the resolution. And for the longest time, brands have been marketing high-resolution cameras as being perfect for portrait photography. Now, the truth lies in the delivery. If you fully control the delivery and you decide what format prints you'll deliver to your portrait clients, or if the images are gonna be for web use only, you'll need much lower resolution than if you worked for ad agencies or brands that require large format prints for advertising. But what are the actual numbers? Let's look at what resolutions are typical for different media types. Regular Instagram post is 1080 by 1350 pixels, which translates to roughly 1.5 megapixels. A 5:7 print at a standard resolution of 300 dpi DPI is 1500 by 2100 pixels, and that's around 3 megapixels. A standard magazine cover is 2400 by 3300, and that's under 8 megapixels. So that means if you get a 24 megapixel camera, you can print your images up to 13 by 20 inches. But that's not all. Large format prints are meant to be looked at from further away, so they're usually printed at 72 dpi instead of 300, which means that the same 24 megapixel camera can handle up to 55 by 83 inch prints. Now, I've retouched everything from 50 megapixel Canon and Sony to 100 megapixel Fuji GFX and Phase 1 images. And unless you do a side-by-side comparison, it's really hard to tell what the image was shot on, even at 200%. So unless you're shooting campaigns for Nike every week and you have a requirement to deliver 50 plus megapixel images, you probably don't need anything more than 24. Now, if you do need the extra pixels, you have to keep in mind that image quality does not come only from the sensor. And at higher resolutions, the tier of the lens starts to matter even more. Not because of the robustness and build quality, but because optical quality like edge of the frame sharpness, vignetting, and chromatic aberrations are much better controlled on a premium glass than on the entry-level tiers. So the control on delivery also affects your lens choices. Now, the last one in this section is flash color consistency and temperature accuracy. These are mostly important in commercial work where you need very consistent results between frames. As a rule of thumb, lower-end flash units have bigger variation in color and even power consistency between shots. And as I've mentioned in the previous section, that increases even more shooting at full power. For portrait work on location, that variation is usually invisible. And if you're shooting in a studio, you might notice it on a seamless backdrop. But generally, that's not a deal breaker until you start shooting catalogs or corporate headshots, where multiple images are displayed side by side. But even then, you can correct that in post. It's just more work for you. Now that we've covered all the aspects of control, no less important is the question of style. So if focal length is a question of control in sports and wildlife, in portrait photography, it's mostly a question of style. You have Platon, who famously shoots his portraits on a wide-angle lens because he wants that raw, confrontational, in-your-face intimacy with the subject. And you have other photographers who love the background compression at 200mm because it isolates the subject and flattens the facial features. There is no right answer here, and you can only figure out what you like by renting out lenses and doing test shoots. I personally love the 85mm look for my portraits, and that's what I recommend as a starting point. The same applies to aperture. Some people shoot at f1.2, others shoot at f11. I shoot anywhere between 1.4 and f2 because I think it combines the best of both worlds with a shallow depth of field but still more or less affordable price tag. Now for light modifiers, almost every feature comes down to your style. The shape and depth of the modifier, the lining, the diffusion layers, and grid compatibility all affect how your light behaves and looks in the image. But that's a whole nother video, and if you're interested in portrait lighting, I talk about the crucial foundations in this video right here. So we've covered the 5 questions and we're still left with 3 features. Lens mount just comes down to what camera manufacturer you pick. Usually people have their preference because someone in the family has a camera they can borrow and use, or they've already bought a camera and have at least one compatible lens lying around. Full frame versus APS-C coverage for the lens is also decided by the camera body. One caveat though is if you have an APS-C body now but plan on getting a full frame one in the future, you should start investing in full frame lenses from the start, instead of buying the APS-C ones and then having to sell them all once you change the body. And finally, the mount type for both the flash unit and the modifier. These obviously should match, but that doesn't mean you have to stick with one manufacturer. The trinity of Profoto, Broncolor, and Elinchrom have their proprietary mounts, but Godox, Aperture, Nanlite, and many others use Bowens mount, which is probably the most widely used one in the market for both flashes and constant light. And even if you find a modifier you want that uses a proprietary mount of other manufacturer, you almost always have an option to get an adapter speed ring that solves the problem. For example, I know many photographers use Broncolor lights with Elinchrom softboxes, connecting them with a compatible speed ring. Now, before we get to the actual buying process, I want to zoom out for a second. We just went through 43 features, and not once did we compare 2 cameras to each other. Every decision came from how you work, and that's the whole point. The reason portrait photographers buy the wrong equipment is usually not because they didn't do enough research. It's because they start from the wrong place. They compare products to products instead of matching products to their workflow. And honestly, the biggest gear trap of them all isn't buying the wrong camera or the wrong lens. It's believing that your gear is what separates you from other photographers. And it's just not. A photographer with a $3,000 kit who understands light and makes their client feel comfortable will always build a stronger business than a photographer with a $15,000 kit who doesn't. Your competitive advantage was never the equipment. Okay, so now you've figured out all the features that are important to you. The remaining question is, how do you pick the exact model if several products fit your needs? And I know it's tempting to start watching those review and comparison videos again. So to help you avoid that, here's a quick 5-step process I use to make a decision. 1. Go to B&H or Adorama or any website you buy your gear from and filter by the features you actually need. 2. Sort by the lowest price. 3. Get the top 3 models and ask Grok what are people on Reddit saying about those specific models regarding user experience and durability. 4. Pick one and rent it out for a weekend. And 5, try it out for yourself and decide if it fits your needs. I've mentioned this several times already, but I think the biggest mistake is to buy a piece of gear without testing it first and getting stuck with either an expensive device that you don't utilize or a cheap one that misses some crucial feature you need. Now, if you've reached this part of the video and still feel a bit overwhelmed with options, I've prepared a free gear guide. No affiliate links, no sponsored products, just what I'd actually recommend after 12 years of shooting. There's my go-to starter camera body, lens, flash unit, and softbox combo under $3,000 for portrait photography. The link's in the description, and if you have any questions, just drop a comment below. As always, hope this video helped you look at gear decisions from a different angle. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next one.